The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Victoria Sterling's penthouse apartment as she stared at the elegant wedding invitation that had been haunting her for weeks. Jonathan Marcus, her ex-fiancé of 3 years, was marrying his personal assistant in what the society pages called the wedding of the decade. At 36, Victoria had built Sterling Communications from a small public relations firm into a media empire. Her success was legendary, her reputation formidable, but standing in her silk pajamas holding that invitation, she felt like the vulnerable 25-year-old who had believed in forever with the wrong man. "You have to go," her assistant had said the day before. "If you don't show up, they'll think you're bitter. The press will have a field day." Victoria knew she was right. In her world of high-stakes business and social positioning, appearances mattered almost as much as quarterly reports. She needed to walk into that wedding with her head held high, preferably with someone impressive on her arm. That's when she remembered Michael. She had met Michael Rodriguez 3 weeks earlier under the most unexpected circumstances. Her car had broken down in a working-class neighborhood after a community outreach meeting, and while waiting for her driver, she'd watched a man teaching his young daughter to ride a bicycle in the small park across the street. The little girl, maybe 6 years old, with dark curls bouncing under her helmet, had fallen twice. Each time the man had knelt beside her with infinite patience, checking for scrapes, offering encouragement, never showing a trace of frustration. "It's okay, Isabella," he'd said in a voice that carried both strength and gentleness. "Remember what we talked about? Sometimes we fall down, but we always get back up. That's how we learn to fly." Something about that moment had struck Victoria profoundly. When her driver finally arrived, she'd found herself asking about the local community center, learning about their after-school programs, and somehow ending up in a conversation with the man from the park. Michael was 38, a former architect who had left his corporate job 2 years earlier when his ex-wife abandoned them. Now he worked multiple part-time jobs, handyman work, weekend construction, evening tutoring, whatever it took to provide for Isabella while being present for the moments that mattered most. The conversation had been brief, but Victoria had walked away with his business card and a strange feeling she couldn't quite name. When desperation about the wedding hit, his number was the first one she'd called. "I have an unusual proposition," she'd said when he answered, trying to keep her voice professional. "I need a date for a wedding this Saturday. It's a business necessity, and I'm willing to compensate you fairly for your time." There had been a long pause before Michael replied, "Miss Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think we move in the same circles." "That's exactly why this would work," Victoria had pressed. "Look, I'll be honest. My ex-fiancé is getting married, and I need to show up looking successful and unaffected. You're intelligent, well-spoken, and you clean up nicely. It's just one evening, completely professional." Another pause. "How much?" Victoria had named a figure that would cover Isabella's daycare for 3 months. Michael had accepted. Now, as Saturday evening approached, Victoria found herself more nervous than she'd expected. She'd sent Michael to her personal stylist and arranged for a tuxedo that transformed him from handyman to leading man. When he arrived at her apartment, she barely recognized him. The casual jeans and work shirt were gone, replaced by a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair was styled, but still showed that slight wave that spoke of a man who worked with his hands. There was something almost magnetic about the confidence he carried, not the polished arrogance she was used to in her social circle, but something deeper and more authentic. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she appeared in her navy blue evening gown, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. The wedding was being held at the prestigious Thornfield Estate, a venue that screamed old money and social prominence. As their car pulled into the circular drive, Victoria felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. "Remember," she said, touching up her lipstick in the car mirror, "we've been dating for a few months. You're in construction management. Keep it vague if anyone asks specifics." Michael nodded, but as they stepped out of the car and he offered her his arm, she noticed he didn't seem intimidated by the grandeur around them. If anything, he moved with a quiet confidence that surprised her. The ceremony was held in the estate's rose garden, with 300 guests seated beneath a canopy of white roses and crystal chandeliers. Victoria and Michael found seats near the back, but she could feel eyes on them immediately. The whispers started almost at once. "Who's that with Victoria Sterling?" He's handsome, but I don't recognize him. Must be from out of town. Jonathan looked radiant in his custom tuxedo, beaming as his young bride walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people made in a year. Victoria watched with careful composure, determined not to let any emotion show on her face. But as the ceremony progressed, she found herself stealing glances at Michael. He was watching the proceedings with genuine interest, not judgment or discomfort. When the bride stumbled slightly on her dress, Victoria saw him instinctively lean forward as if to help, though he was too far away to do anything. During the reception, Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Jonathan approached their table with his new wife, radiating the kind of smugness that made Victoria's teeth ache. "Victoria," he said with false warmth, "so glad you could make it." "And who's this?" "Jonathan, this is Michael Rodriguez," Victoria replied smoothly. "Michael, my former business partner, Jonathan Marcus." The emphasis on former wasn't lost on anyone. Jonathan's smile tightened slightly as he shook Michael's hand. "Rod," Jonathan mused, "are you in media as well?" "Construction," Michael replied simply. "I build things that last." The subtle dig wasn't lost on Jonathan, whose own business had been plagued by ethical scandals since their breakup. His new wife, barely 25 and clearly uncomfortable, tugged at his arm. "Well," Jonathan said, his voice cooling, "how refreshing to see Victoria exploring new demographics." Victoria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but before she could respond, Michael stood up slowly. At his full height, he was impressive, and something in his demeanor commanded attention. "You know," Michael said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge, "in my line of work, I've learned that the strongest foundations are built on respect and integrity. Seems like some people never learn that lesson." Jonathan's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Michael continued, "Victoria, would you like to dance?" As they moved to the dance floor, Victoria was trembling with a mixture of humiliation and gratitude. "I'm sorry," she whispered as Michael pulled her into his arms. "He's always been cruel, but bringing you into it was unforgivable." "He doesn't define you," Michael said quietly, leading her in a slow waltz that surprised her with its elegance. "And he certainly doesn't define your worth." Something in his voice made her look up into his eyes, and what she saw there was understanding that went deeper than she'd expected from their business arrangement. "How do you know how to dance like this?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood. Michael smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached his eyes. "My daughter insisted I learn. She has very strong opinions about what makes a gentleman. Isabella sounds like a remarkable little girl." "She's everything," Michael said simply. "When her mother left, I thought my world was ending. But Isabella taught me that sometimes losing what you think you want makes room for what you actually need." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. There was something in his words that resonated with a pain she'd been carrying for 3 years. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself genuinely enjoying Michael's company. He was intelligent without being condescending, confident without being arrogant. When her business associates approached their table, he held his own in conversations about everything from city planning to economic development. But it was the small gestures that undid her completely. The way he stood when any woman approached their table, how he remembered her preference for sparkling water and made sure her glass was always full. The protective way he placed his hand on the small of her back when they walked through the crowd. Late in the evening, as they sat on the estate's terrace overlooking the gardens, Victoria found herself telling Michael things she'd never told anyone, about the loneliness of success, about the pressure to always appear perfect, about how Jonathan's betrayal had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love and trust. "He cheated on me with her," she said quietly, nodding toward the dance floor where Jonathan was spinning his new wife under the chandeliers. "3 weeks before our wedding, I found out from a tabloid photographer who'd been following them for months." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry. That kind of betrayal changes you. How do you do it?" Victoria asked. "Trust again after someone you love abandons you?" Michael looked out at the garden where fairy lights twinkled among the roses. "I had to learn that Isabella's mother leaving wasn't about my worth as a person. It was about her inability to handle the responsibility of loving someone completely. The hardest lesson I've learned is that you can't let someone else's limitations define your capacity for love." Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. I've been so angry for so long. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Anger protects us, Michael said gently. But it also isolates us. Isabella taught me that. How? Michael smiled softly. She was furious with her mother for the first year. Wouldn't talk about her, wouldn't look at pictures. Then one day she asked me if being angry at mommy meant she couldn't love other people. I realized she was asking the question I'd been afraid to ask myself. Victoria wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. And what was the answer? That love isn't diminished by being hurt. It's just more careful about where it lands. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the celebration continue inside. Victoria felt something shifting inside her chest, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Of course. Why did you agree to this? The money couldn't have been the only reason. Michael was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. 3 weeks ago, I watched you at that community center meeting. You stayed after everyone else left, asking real questions about the kids' programs, taking notes like their answers actually mattered. Most people in your position would have written a check and left. He turned to look at her directly. But you stayed. You listened. And when that little boy spilled juice on your designer suit, you didn't flinch. You helped him clean it up and told him accidents happen to everyone. Victoria remembered that moment. 8-year-old Marcus had been mortified, but she'd seen her own childhood clumsiness in his embarrassment. I realized then that maybe you weren't as different from the rest of us as your reputation suggested, Michael continued. When you called about tonight, I thought maybe someone who understood about being judged by appearances might also understand about second chances. Victoria felt her breath catch. Second chances? I haven't been on a date since Isabella's mother left. Haven't wanted to, but something about tonight, about being here with you. Feels like maybe I'm ready to remember what it's like to connect with someone again. The honesty in his voice broke something open in Victoria's chest. For 3 years, she'd armored herself against feeling anything real for anyone, but sitting here with this man who had shown her more genuine care in one evening than Jonathan had in 3 years together, she felt those walls beginning to crumble. Michael, she began, but he held up a gentle hand. I know this was supposed to be just business, he said, and I understand if that's all it can be. Our lives are very different. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the borrowed tuxedo to the man underneath. A man who'd sacrificed his career to be present for his daughter, who taught himself to dance because it mattered to a 6-year-old, who could see through her public persona to the wounded woman beneath and offer comfort without judgment. What if I don't want it to be just business? She heard herself say. Michael's eyes searched her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe this evening has been the most honest I've felt in 3 years. I'm saying that watching you tonight, seeing how you treat people, how you move through the world with such integrity, makes me want to be better than I've been. She took a shaky breath. I'm saying that I think I'd like to meet Isabella if you'd be willing to introduce us. Michael's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. She'd like that. She's been asking about the pretty lady who helped Marcus with his juice. Victoria laughed through her tears. She knows about that. Isabella knows about everything that matters to me, Michael said softly. And I have a feeling you're going to matter quite a lot. As they drove home that night, Victoria's head resting on Michael's shoulder in the back seat of her car, she realized that sometimes the most unexpected invitations lead to the most extraordinary destinations. She'd hired Michael to help her save face at her ex's wedding, but he'd done something far more valuable. He'd helped her save her heart. 6 months later, Victoria would walk into that same community center, not as a visiting executive, but as a volunteer reading tutor. Isabella would be beside her, chattering excitedly about the stories they were going to share with the other children. And Michael would be there too, leading a workshop on home repair for single mothers. His tool belt replaced by a kind smile and infinite patience for questions about fixing leaky faucets and squeaky doors. The wedding invitation that had once represented everything painful about Victoria's past would be tucked away in a memory box. Not as a reminder of loss, but as a testament to the beautiful truth that sometimes the most meaningful love stories begin as business arrangements between two people brave enough to let their walls come down. Sometimes healing comes not from avoiding the places that hurt us, but from returning to them with someone who helps us see them differently. And sometimes the most profound gift we can give someone isn't perfection, but the courage to be vulnerable enough to let love find us where we are.